Hello, I'm Bea Gare. I'd like to show you the 4 essential things you need to know in order to be able to knit. That is, to cast on, to knit, to purl and to cast off. If you can do these 4 things, the whole world of knitting is open to you in the future. So what do you need if you want to knit along with me? Well, you'll need some knitting needles, and I would suggest that if you're a new knitter, then somewhere between 4 and 6 millimeters is probably something that will feel comfortable in your hands. That size is 6 to 8 if you're a US viewer. And to go with that, you'll need some yarn. Any yarn will do. But again, if you're just starting, something like this, which is a double knit, or as heavy as an Aran weight yarn, will work with those needle sizes. I'm going to be demonstrating how to knit English style, that is, with the yarn in your right hand. So shall we see what that looks like? The first thing we need to do is to make a slip knot. Then you put the yarn on the needle like this and tighten up the knot until it sits comfortably on the needle. At this stage, you take the needle in your left hand, hold back that piece of end of yarn and slip that needle in behind the first from the front to the back. Taking the yarn in your right hand, wrap that clockwise through the middle of the needles and pull the yarn through, and then take the loop and slip it onto that left hand needle. You now have 2 stitches on that left hand needle, and you continue the process. Put your needle in from front to back, loop the yarn round, pull it through and put that loop on the needle. And keep doing that until you have as many stitches as you want on the needle, or if you're just having a practice piece, probably 15 stitches. So now I've got 15 stitches on the needle, and the next stage that we need to learn is how to knit. Knitting involves taking a loop of yarn from the back of the work to the front of the work. So in order to achieve that, you insert your needle through the front of the first stitch on the needle and move, as you did for casting on, move that yarn round and up through the middle. But instead of taking the yarn and putting it on the needle as you did before, you take that first stitch and just slip it right off the needle. I like to think of this as stabbing, strangling, yanking the cord and knocking your head off. it's a way of remembering how to do it. You stab, you strangle, you pull the yarn tight, and then you knock its block off. It's quite simple, really. And then just carry on doing that, and you can speed up or slow down as much as you need. So I'll finish off this row, and then we'll get on to what you do on the next row, which is purling. There's a bit of stabbing and strangling there too. So that's the first row completed, the first 15 stitches, and it's still not looking desperately impressive, but then it was the first row. So now let's move on to what you do on a purl row. What you have facing you when you turn the needle round is a row of bumps. Those are called, that's a technical term, purl bumps. And it's a way when you first start knitting to tell which side of the fabric you've got towards you. So this is the purl side with all the bumps on it. And when you're purling, what you're doing is you're just knitting but in reverse. So here we go. Insert your right hand needle from the back of the fabric to the front, and then going first through the cross of the needles and round. In other words, moving that yarn in the same direction as you did when you were making the knit stitch, and then you pull that yarn through from the front of the fabric to the back of the fabric and knock that stitch off the left hand needle. And you continue to do that all the way along the row. And you'll see as you do this, the bumps, the purl bumps are appearing above the previous row. And if you carry on doing this, one row of knit, one row of purl, you end up with something called stocking stitch, which is what most plain knitted fabrics look like. So the jumper I'm wearing is in stocking stitch and has all the purl bumps on the inside in essence. So what I'll do now is just continue knitting this piece of fabric until we get to the stage where we do the fourth and final part of the process, which is casting off. So we've now got a piece of fabric that is stocking stitch. So you knit on the knit side and purl on the purl side. And you can see that classic sort of chevron shape of each stitch across the piece. And that's what you'll see on a lot of pieces of fabric. That's got a lot of purl, it's got a couple of knit stitches as well. If you just do knit stitch on a piece of fabric, you end up with this, which is garter stitch. So that's just row after row of knit stitch. You'll get that effect. So now we're coming to casting off. And casting off is just a knit stitch with one extra step in it. So let me show you what that looks like. To cast off this piece on a knit row, so it's a row with all the chevrons facing you, you do a knit stitch and a second knit stitch, and then you take your first knit stitch and pass it over the second until you just have one stitch on that right hand needle, and you have the previous stitch lying at the base of it, and then you repeat that process. Do one more stitch, take the back stitch, put it over the front. Keep this loose. It's the most important piece of advice I can give, is to keep those stitches loose so that you still have some stretch in the cast off that you've done. There is a tendency for people to pull this too tight, and that means you won't get the necessary give in the fabric. You move that back stitch over the front stitch, and gradually you can see you're getting like a chain will appear across the piece of work, and the number of stitches on your needles will diminish and diminish until you get to this stage where you have 2 stitches left. You knit that very last stitch, you have none left on that needle. You again take the back stitch over the front stitch, and you're left with this one. Now I suggest you pull that into a loop, and then you need to get a pair of scissors, cut your yarn, and you run that yarn through the loop, because otherwise you can unravel the whole thing, and you want to be able to finish it off in such a way that it can't come undone. And there you have your piece of knitting with a standard cast on at the bottom and your chain across the top. And you can see it's got some give, perhaps not quite as much as in the bottom, but if you pull that too tight, you'll end up with a really narrow piece across the top there. So those are the 4 processes that you need to know in order to be able to knit. If you want to know anything more about me or about the sponsors of this video, Wool on the X, then just follow the links on the screen. We're planning lots of workshops on spinning, knitting, crochet, felting and all sorts of other fibre related crafts, and you'll be able to sign up for those via the website. Thank you very much for watching.